forgotten Elder Ridge, and I survived. The first time I walked toward Elder Ridge, the town pretended not to see me leave. A crooked sign, half swallowed by moss, pointed to a path that narrowed between leaning pines and stone. Dusk pooled in the hollows, damp leaves sighed under my boots. People used the word forgotten when they described the place, but there was a different habit in their faces, a small, private remembering that made them look away. I had come home to settle an estate and a rumor, and the ridge felt like an answer waiting in the dark. The rumor had a dozen shapes, but a single tone. Keep away unless you like being called home by what you buried. At the diner the next morning, a woman dried her hands and described the elder, as if naming a relative who'd moved out and stopped writing. She didn't look malicious. Her warning was old, like a recipe. I laughed it off then, because laughter is an easy kind of light. Still, the ridge clung in the back of my throat, like a name you almost remember and cannot quite place. On the ridgeline, the trees closed like the pages of a book. My lantern was a punctual, private sun, cutting circles into the fog. Stones were stacked in careless towers. Names had been carved into a few posts near what remained of a lookout. The air smelled of wet wood and the faint manganese tang of old metal. Every so often the path would fork, and the choice between two narrow trails felt like answering a question about yourself you had not known you'd been asked. Midway up, I found the journal. Half buried in a rut, its leather was softened by rain, and the cover had a thumb-smudged indentation where someone had pressed a name. Inside, lines were short and uneven, sometimes a single word followed by a scratch of ink. Remember, stay, forgive. One page was different, not a line, but a direct, plain sentence that made my chest hollow. You were meant to come back when you were ready to remember. The handwriting could have been anyone's, and that was what made it feel personalized. I carried the journal like contraband and kept it closed under my coat. In town, Agnes, the historian with slow, precise eyes, repeated a fragment of local lore. Names left unspoken gathered on the ridge. People go up to remind the ridge who they are, she said, and sometimes it reminds them back. She was careful not to assign malice. Mostly, the ridge collected omissions and returned them altered. Her warning sat between us like a polite instrument, informative, precise, and undeniably ominous. That night, the ridge learned my name. I slept in an abandoned ranger cabin and woke to the sound of something arranging stones, not hurriedly, but with a rhythm that matched breathing. Outside, the fog shifted in slow, considered gestures. When I took the lantern and followed the noise, the little cairns were new, each one balanced with patient fingertips. One lay with its pebble pointing along the path, as if to direct me forward or to remind me of a wrong turn from years ago. The choice felt like a question I had been avoiding. Sleep eroded more quickly than I anticipated. Small things changed while I wasn't looking. A line in the journal smudged into a different word, my watch losing an hour, then finding it back. My reflection in a window lagged by a breath, or I imagined it did. The ridge's influence was not a single event, but a sequence of tiny tremors, like a house settling around an old, secret room. Each tremor made me quieter and more attentive to silences that had once been merely empty. One morning, a pebble arrangement spelled an initial I used only as a child, I hadn't thought about it in years. The letters felt less like vandalism and more like someone sifting through a desk drawer of memories, laying out what belonged where. Panic was a practical thing then. I checked the cabin for footprints, for any sign I'd been followed. There were only the cairns, patient and indifferent, and the ridges quiet that had settled like dust on every surface of my life. I tried to turn my observations into a map. Each oddity had coordinates: a broken branch by the third pine, a note in the journal filled with a sentence that mirrored a dream, the lantern left swinging though I'd tied it. Writing it all down made the pattern visible and also amplified it. The act of naming seemed to tug. When I reread pages at midnight, phrases shifted. What had been forgive became remember, and then a fragment of a sentence I felt like I had once spoken aloud in a different life. The night the voice came, it wasn't a word, but a cadence, the rhythm of a sentence left unfinished. It moved through the trees like someone reading from a well-worn list, finding names and hesitating over particular ones. I stood on the lookout platform and let the sound crawl over me. In the fog, something shifted. The carved names in the posts seemed to draw closer, like features relaxing into a face. For a terrible, persuasive moment, the ridge felt not like a place, but like a patient mind working through its inventory. Then I saw it, or thought I did. A tall silhouette beyond the trees, something wrapped in drifting gray that could have been a cloak, or simply the fall of fog over a tree trunk. It moved without haste and left the world exactly as it found it. Small disturbances, rearranged stones, a shape dismissed by the light of my lantern. If there was a face, it was the face of memory, familiar enough to ache, but never quite resolvable. I had prepared for threats. I'd not prepared for being recognized. Confrontation was less a moment than an accumulation. I climbed to the tallest point, journal in hand, and read aloud a fragment of my own life. Names I hadn't said in years, apologies too small for what they'd once tried to fix. The ridge answered not with violence, but with a sudden clarity. Memories returned to me in perfect, humiliating detail. Things I had shelved because they made me look less noble in my own story. For a flicker, I understood the ridge's method. It did not punish, it reminded. I wanted to leave a thing behind more than I wanted to leave the place. I wrote my name on a fresh page, underlined it, then folded the paper and slipped it into a crevice in an old stone. Doing something deliberate felt like an antidote. The stone swallowed the paper as if it had been waiting. For an instant, the fog thinned, and the world realigned enough that I believed I could walk away and be whole. The ridge, however, seemed only to be cataloging the transaction. I ran down the path at dawn with the ridge behind me and the town fog-silvered ahead. Agnes waited at the edge of the trees like someone ready to receive a confession. She neither scolded nor celebrated. Her face held a patient recognition, the kind that considers facts rather than feelings. "You went up," she observed. "You brought something back, or you left something there. Some things like being returned to." I wanted to tell her I'd won, that the ridge had backed down, but my voice shrank as if words were possessions the ridge might claim. Back in my apartment, ordinary surfaces took on new meanings. A coffee cup looked like a landmark. The echo of footfall in the hallway resembled the cairn's pebble tap. Sometimes, late, house would hold a pressure, as if someone were sitting on the roof, not to harm, but to be where the skyline meets thought. I could no longer pretend I had not been altered. Survival had a taste, something like cold iron and old rain. I was intact, undeniably so, but thin at the edges, as if memory had threaded me differently. Nights come now with small reminders: a pebble placed on my windowsill in the morning, a line from the journal I hadn't written appearing in my handwriting. Once, in the quiet, I heard a cadence of names, mine among them, moving like a procession on the ridge above. I traveled to sleep with the odd conviction that I had brought a piece of that place home, and that it was learning to live in the narrow rooms of my days. I had survived the ridge's hunger for bodies, and yet I could feel it tending to a different appetite. Some mornings, a shadow crosses my wall, and I imagine the ridge walking above the houses. I remain convinced that if I go back, I will be noticed differently, recognized, and cataloged further. There is comfort in the idea that place remembers us, and there is terror in the realization that sometimes what remembers asks for a price measured not in injury, but in the honest, noisy accounting of ourselves. If you ever find yourself at a mossed sign and a path that narrows, think of what you keep hidden and whether it may prefer to be named.